Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on the world of startups. Today, my guest is from SnapLogic. We have Scott Edgington. Scott is the Senior VP for Worldwide Field Operations at the company. So, Scott, welcome to the show today.
Well, thanks, Rich. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. So, I've brought your slides up. SnapLogic does cloud integration with no silos. Why don't you tell us more about that?
Sure. So Rich, we'll get into it more, but there's some really interesting trends happening today with the popularity and momentum behind a lot of the new cloud technologies that are coming into large enterprises as well as medium and small size. And the challenge with that is that it kind of imposes a new set of conditions around how to integrate these applications. And so SnapLogic was founded to help address some of those issues. So if you want to move to my agenda slide, what I wanted to do was just kind of take you through a little bit of who we are, talk to you about some of those trends that I just referred to, talk about some of the existing problems around just the long tail of integration, and then some cloud fundamentals, and then just real quickly kind of take you through our platform and how we're addressing these problems. Does that make sense?
You bet.
Great. So if you go to the next slide, just a quick overview on the company. It's a very interesting company. So we were founded by Gaurav Dhillon, who was the original founder of Informatica. He started the company in his garage and took the company through a successful IPO and grew it into a multi-billion-dollar company over roughly 12 years. And he took a little time off and was sitting on a board with Mark Andreessen, and who obviously invented the browser and was one of the leaders with Netscape. And Mark actually brought up this challenge around with these new cloud technologies that it creates a barrier to integration because when they're not running in your data center, you can't simply do these types of integrations over your own private network. And how do we make sure that all these new cloud technologies don't take us back into the 90s when we had all this siloed information and CIOs couldn't really pull it together to give them competitive advantage? So Gaurav took off on that idea and decided to start a company and put his money where his mouth is. And we've had a very successful launch and run, bringing on some very successful customers. So if you go to my next slide, I'll take you through just a few of those real quick. So Fox News in New York is using us to aggregate different social media feeds to arm their news reporters and staff. And what's interesting, a lot of these media feeds now have different data types. So, everything's not in rows and columns like it was in the past. And so, our platform is really very uniquely purposed to be able to handle all these new web technologies and data types. Fusion.io is a company where we're doing, classic business integration on the front end. And probably not the sexiest company to talk about, but a very, very powerful integration is Outback Steakhouse, where we literally have 85,000 employees flowing over our integration platform every day. So as you can imagine, with all the locations they have, employees are being onboarded and offboarded from the company on a daily basis. And so through SnapLogic, everything is purposed. They're provisioned into their Active Directory systems, Exchange, Travel, every other business application that would be used by those employees. And this is all done seamlessly through SnapLogic. The CIO there is a very compelling individual. He actually was in charge of running integration for Home Depot for many years and was the former CIO of Winn-Dixie. So, clearly a gentleman who has many years in the integration space and is battle tested. And then, we see some new type companies like Pandora, where from the ground up, their objective was to basically have no data center of their own, to do everything in the cloud. And they've been very successful working with us over the last couple of years. And you see a quote out to the right here, as Mark Brennan says, in this type of environment, we can't simply have every integration or change turn into a full-blown integration project. I mean, the goal of IT should be to support the business, and that's really what they've done. Very compelling integration project. And then the last one, UCSF. This is actually UCSF Medical Center. They're actually the largest Salesforce deployment in the world. And as you can imagine, privacy concerns are paramount for this type of organization. So we bring that one up because if we can keep everything secure and private for a large medical center like UCSF, we think that's pushed us to our paces to make sure we can do it for everyone else. So moving to the next slide, I wanted to go through some of these trends that are happening today. And when you think about the 90s and the early 2000s, Most companies really had 4, 5, 6 really major business applications, and these were very large investments. They were very large integration investments and customization investments. And as we joke like to say, you bought it, you customized it, and then you just grin and bear it as long as you can. Because if you even have to move to the next release, you probably have to start all over again. These were all run behind the firewall. And again, thinking about the differences of yesterday versus today, in the past, you controlled the bandwidth, you controlled the latency. Nothing ever moved unless you had probably 20 signatures or more. And then you contrast that to today, and kind of the vision is people want to pay as they go. They want to have the ability to switch when they want. That's just good business. But what's happening too is that the technology being used by these companies is really becoming more of a technology fabric, and very purpose-built technologies being delivered by innovative companies today. And these need to be stitched together into that fabric so that the data isn't trapped in these individual silos, because each one of them is running in a very different cloud. And we've got to be able to do that at a cost point that makes sense, because in the past, large customers think in terms of cost per endpoint when they integrate. And often what we hear is hundreds of thousands of dollars per endpoint. And if you were spending millions of dollars on these large classic systems of the past, maybe that was tolerable. But in today's environment and ecosystem, you really got to be in the fives of thousands or tens of thousands. And then, as we mentioned earlier, these different data types, and we'll touch on that more. And then finally, working over the public internet. So the public internet is very different than your private network. It's more like getting on the freeway in the morning. You don't know where the accidents are. You're not sure how you might get to work. And yet, while you're probably talking on the phone to somebody, you're making those changes as you go. They're very much like the internet. We don't have to think about how our message gets from here to Taiwan. It simply does, because the underpinnings of the internet are such that it makes it resilient, self-healing, and massively scalable. And that same architectural underpinning for the public internet is what we've architected our platform on today. So I'll get onto that more later. But if we move to the next slide, talking about cloud and big data. So, in the past, there were really two major camps of how people did integration. Well, actually, I should say three. On the left, you see ETL, which was used to do large batch projects, lots of data warehousing. And on the right, you see EAI. So this was the classic, SLA infrastructure, service bus. And those systems are very, very strong. They're very purpose-built. But keep in mind, the design point is probably close to 20 years ago. So pre-internet, everything was rows and columns. Everything ran on a private network. Very complex infrastructure. But what you see in the middle here is an open area. And what's happening in this open area is you've got projects that, they're important, but they're not mission critical. And so what happens is this is the area where we see a lot of custom coding. This is outsourced hand coding. This could be internally done hand coding. But not, all the same, it's hand coding. And what's happening today also is we see real changes around volume, velocity, and the variety of data, let alone the location of that data. We've got big movements around big data, and we've got movements around cloud. And you see those arrows are going in opposite directions, because the whole objective of big data is to aggregate my data together in one location and do interesting things with it. Yet, when I'm moving more and more to the cloud, aren't I actually making that more challenging to accomplish, right? So if we move to the next slide, what we really see, and you can build this out, there's a couple more arrows there around social media and mobile data, is we really see that this middle area is where cloud integration becomes really important. Because for large enterprises, hand coding is a real challenge, because now not only are you having to manage that code for a long period of time, documentation usually is not that strong, and you've also got a lot of business logic locked up in this code. So the minute you go into production with that, someone's going to have a fantastic idea about how to improve that. And now we're back to kicking off yet another integration project. So this cloud integration space is one where SnapLogic was founded and purpose-built to really address this area. How to do integrations quickly, to do it on a commercially supported platform, to help remove a lot of that hand coding. And on the next slide, you're going to see just how big a problem that is. And what we're seeing with ETL and EAI is they both have a very important role in the world today and going forward. But what we want to make sure of, and what we hear from enterprise architects, is I want to use the right tool for the right problem. And what we're finding today is in this section in the middle, there's never been a really good answer. And that's where SnapLogic fits today. So to highlight how big this problem is, if you move to the next slide, this long tail of integration that we speak of. So what we're finding today is that only about 20% of the integration projects in the world today are purpose-built or purposed specifically where an EAI, ETL, ESB solution is the right answer. And especially as we move to the cloud, we see a lot of tactical integration taking place. And this becomes a huge problem. So not only is it 80% of the type of data flows that need to be addressed, but working with one of the largest retailers in the world who has a very diligent architectural governance program, they do 75% of the integrations using one of those two commercial technologies, ETL or EAI. And so they feel they're doing a great job. And they have about 5 FTEs weekly that manage those systems operationally. But the 25% that's being done through hand coding and custom work requires 50 full-time employees daily just to manage the break fix. So even though they're defying this slide, and they've actually got 75% of it in the sweet spot on a commercially supported platform, they're realizing that the 25% is still just very costly and challenging for them for their business. So we really think that middle section that I talked about on the previous slide is a critical gap that needs to be filled by a commercially supported platform. So switching gears a little bit, going to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about just some of the cloud integration fundamentals. So as we like to say, our whole goal in life is to empower the people. What was really interesting around Informatica that Gaurav founded was his sole purpose was to put a graphical user interface on front of a very complex problem around data warehousing. And that's what they did, and it was a huge success. There's a fact pattern here, because if you look at Salesforce.com, their success has highly been tied to the fact that they could actually empower the business analysts to create new reports, to do all types of complex analysis. So as one CTO told me, the great thing about moving from Siebel to Salesforce was that I no longer had to be in charge of every small change that needed to take place. And in the past, those changes were a full-blown IT project. And so at SnapLogic, we share that vision. The whole goal here is to take away all of that coding requirement and create a very easy-to-use integration platform so that the business analysts or the IT analysts can actually support the line of business and do these things very quickly and efficiently. And going to the next slide, we also feel that at least 75% of the cost has got to be taken out of integration. And that's not simply a pricing model. It really becomes a challenge on what is your business delivery process for us as a company, as well as how do we potentially take advantage of a larger ecosystem to handle probably the largest Achilles heel in the integration space, which are connectors, or as we call them, snaps. So moving to the next slide, I want to talk about that. So in the past, what's interesting, if you recall, we said there were only really 5, 7, 10 really big, important applications. Yet today, we're talking about hundreds and possibly thousands. So as we started the company, we really looked at this challenge and thought about how we could open this up to a broader community. And fortunately, we didn't have to go far down the street to look at our friends at Apple and see what they had done around their App Store and how they basically empowered a global community of developers and software companies to create applications, and they could actually host those through Apple. Apple would certify them, but they'd also revenue share with them. So there was actually some skin in the game. And that's the exact same model that we've deployed in what we call our SnapStore. And so in a very short period of time, less than 2 years, we've actually amassed and brought to market more commercial connectors, or snaps, than companies that have been in the space for almost 20 years. And what's also interesting, if you go into that SnapStore, is you'll see multiple offerings for the same application like Salesforce.com. And people will often ask, is that an error? And we kind of chuckle and say, no, that's called open market competition, baby. And that's good for the customer. So they are competing for the business. It keeps the price point low, and it keeps the quality high. And that's exactly how it should be. So the SnapStore is a really important aspect. There's some things that we've done in our Snap architecture that make it very easy for third parties or SnapLogic or customers to create their own snaps. And we'll touch on that in a bit. And then the next slide, really very important, is that there's a real bifurcation in this integration space. So if you look at the traditional incumbents in this market, again, their design point was 10, 12, 15 years ago. And so they weren't thinking about the public internet. They weren't thinking about data types beyond rows and columns. and they're very complex infrastructures. So they get the ground and they get the enterprise capabilities that are really important, but they really are challenged to understand the cloud and how to close that gap. I mean, to a large extent, we kind of think of this as kind of the BlackBerry versus the iPhone challenge. That, I love my BlackBerries and I like Research in Motion, but gosh, it's been 5 years, and with all the money and all the king's men, they haven't been able to close that gap. And this is the classic first mover versus second mover advantage situation. On the other side, we have a couple of early movers in the cloud space, and while they've done a really nice job of demonstrating that integration in the cloud is a great strategy, what they haven't done is figured out how to do this for the large enterprise. And so these are very tactical point-to-point integration architectures. Again, their design points were actually more than 10 years ago, so they weren't thinking about the cloud. They just made the first move to try to go there. SnapLogic is the first company and only company today that has built a platform from the ground up, thinking about the enterprise class challenges that people have. Highly complex integrations, yet being able to abstract away the complexity and deliver that to the business analysts. And so moving to the next slide, I mean, to kind of sum this up a bit, what we're also betting on is that simplicity wins. And over the years, we've seen that this is always the case. Steve Jobs was very successful in putting one button on a phone. And people thought he was crazy to do that. He put one click on a computer. And so, we are seeing this start to carry through. So we're seeing that things like REST is being adopted much more broadly than SOAP today. When SOAP was introduced 10 years ago, again, pre-internet, people thought it was too simple. Now we look at it and say, gosh, it's just way too hard. Things like JSON outpacing XML. And those types of things. And the large ISVs are all moving to REST, and so that's a really important aspect. And so switching gears again, just to take you down to the next phase and talk a little bit about our platform. So what we've done, as I mentioned, is we've built this cloud architecture, and the objective of that is that as a customer, you can connect any application to any other application, and we believe the more is better. So what we did is we spent years solving the problem around how to bring all these disparate applications into a common canonical model, so that as I connect application A and application B, as I move to application C, it automatically gets those previous applications for free. So they're basically pre-integrated into this common infrastructure. But at the same time, we also have to be cognizant of the fact of two other very important issues. One is that there are applications on the ground that are going to be there for a very long time. The second thing we have to be cognizant of is that there are security and privacy concerns that are not going to go away. So we purpose-built our architecture to design that in. So what we have the ability to do is also run a secure bridge to the ground and to actually execute integrations locally behind the firewall. So we can argue all day long that certain things should be able to securely be moved up to the cloud to take advantage of cheaper computational economics, but some CIOs are just never going to let that happen. So we have the ability to designate in these integration pipelines where they run. So I can run them in the cloud to take advantage of all the the economic advantages that provides, or I can say this particular integration must always run on the ground behind the firewall. So we give you the ability to do both of those types of things. So where we've got cloud-to-cloud integrations, obviously that makes the most sense to do it in the cloud and then bring it down. Likewise, we may have some very complex integrations where we've got to bring some content from the cloud down, integrate it or merge that, join it with things from SAP or Oracle, and then splinter that off into different delivery points. So we provide the ability to do all of those things seamlessly. And then again, moving to the next slide, I touched earlier a bit on the SnapStore. Here's just a quick screenshot. But again, this is really from a business model standpoint a really key point. What the message is here is simply that we are going to provide connectivity to all these popular applications at a cost point that typically takes at least a zero off the equation. And we're going to provide a competitive marketplace so that there's innovation daily, there's freedom of choice for you as the customer, and you can actually just download these snaps into your environment. You can work with them, you can buy them, and you can move forward. And then just to give you a quick snapshot of what's available today, and obviously this is not a complete list, but what you'll also see is while you see the classics here, the SAPs, the Oracles, and what have you, what you also see is a lot of social media type applications. what we hear from a lot of our customers today is that, our customers don't complain to us, they complain to the world. And so one of the most popular projects we're seeing across industries like financial services, insurance, healthcare, is actually going out and trying to find their customers across some of these social media sites so that they can find a disgruntled customer before they leave them, which is a great way to increase customer service and customer satisfaction. It can be a bit challenging due to the volume, velocity, and the type of data that you need to work through, and we're very adept at doing that. And then touching on private snaps, what we hear a lot is that, gosh, we've got these systems we built many years ago. They're just mission critical to our company. There's lots of business units that would love to get access to those applications, but we've never been able to do it in a way where we could actually empower them to do it. We're very worried about them breaking things or other challenges. And so what we're able to do is allow these companies to build their own private snaps to those applications, and then they can actually empower those different IT groups to access those systems. Likewise, what we can also do is help those applications play nicer in the public internet world. So we can help them actually become restful, help them understand how to not get too upset when there's lack of service or latency in those connections. So we can help those kind of cross-field applications behave a little nicer over the internet. And then, I've been hitting this issue about empowering the people. This is an example of our design environment today. And this is a complete drag and drop. And in the bottom left, we have our foundry where you'll find all types of components and snaps that are available to you. Into the upper left, you'll see your different projects and filters and activities that you want to run into your pipelines as you build those out. And then at the very top, you'll see a button here that says SnapStore. So you can go out to the SnapStore, find additional snaps, download those into your environment, and then you can run those. And as you build these pipelines, what it'll also do is it'll show you if there's any type of data errors and such that don't map up. And also, as you move through this, things in the past like data mapping, which was a really big issue back in the late 90s, those are things that we've really, abstracted away. So we have some intelligent logic that will actually help you through that. It actually is a learning system, so it will look at how you've done other exercises in the past, and so it'll help you actually work through that seamlessly. And then likewise, from a scheduling standpoint, these can be event-driven and triggered. They can be scheduled, in any period of time, and such. But at the same time, going to the next slide, we're doing this over the public internet. And just like driving to work in the morning that we talked about, your mileage and your speed will vary, and sometimes you'll run into some challenges. And so the ability to monitor these integrations 24/7 is really important. So, we're all about that, and we're all about leveraging some of the latest and greatest technologies. So we have an HTML5 application here. You're seeing it run on the iPad. But this application can run on any type of browser, any type of device. And it allows you to go in, look at each of your servers, your instances, look at each of your pipelines, and to see where your performance is, see where your errors have been, and then decide how you want to do that. Now, we also obviously provide other ways of providing that data via an SMS or an email type message, whatever you might need. Those are really table stakes today. And then going to the next slide, just having a little bit of fun. Big data is an important aspect today, and when you think about big data, that's a loosely used term, and really what we're talking about is that the types of problems people are solving today are very different than they were 5-10 years ago. And so, joins were a big deal. But today, at the upper left here, it's not simply about taking your sales table and bringing that together with your customer table to get some interesting information. It's more about how do I, to the lower right, is how do I take my, my sales data, cross-reference that with Google's search API, look at some Facebook sentiment analysis, and then, integrate that with finding some other vendors, and take that through various systems. And to be able to do that knowing that next month the APIs are going to change, that things are going to be hosted in different places, we've just got to take away all of that location dependency, and we've got to be able to make this really simple to do. And that's what SnapLogic's done. So moving to my final slide, just to sum it up a bit, this is a completely internet-structured, architected system. It's completely REST-based. That's the underpinnings that makes the public internet so scalable, so resilient, and that's exactly how we've approached the problem. And because at the end of the day, it's the only way to truly scale cloud-to-cloud and cloud-to-ground integration. We also have to be able to handle all types of data types and sources, and so REST allows us to do that more effectively. The second point, as I mentioned, we spent many years trying to solve this problem, is the containerization. And so by container, if you think about a shipping container, it fits on a ship, it fits on a train, it fits on a truck. That's exactly what we've done is that our snaps are about 80 to 90% reusable. It's a completely modern architecture, whether you want to do Python or Java and developing snaps. And what that allows us to do is, and we've got to be able to deliver some business intelligence in that snap. So again, it's not like the connectors of the past. We actually have to be intelligent about how we actually connect into Salesforce, how we're able to pull that schema into a graphical design environment, and even update it if there's any changes made within Salesforce. And then the third point is I touched on our modern business model, leveraging a third-party ecosystem, which helps us keep the costs down and keep the innovation up. Being able to do this from the cloud, which gives us a more economic model to deliver integration to you, the consumer. And then the final point is just being able to deliver that with real business results. So, doing cloud integration is very different than doing cloud applications. From a architectural standpoint, we have to think about things very differently as far as how we allow customers to have different performance points, different scalability aspects, and service level performance. And so we've been able to separate all the important aspects of how we do versioning and management and development from how we put the horsepower underneath each customer's integration. And that's something we'd love to talk to customers more about. And finally, no coding. And as we touched on, our goal is to get rid of all those silos and allow you to take advantage of this new vision about this fabric of cloud technologies. So, Rich, that's about all I've got for you. My final slide is just how to allow you to reach us if you have questions or would like more information.
Well, terrific, Scott. So, question about how people have been getting this job done before you guys came along, right? I mean, like say if I wanted to talk between, say, Oracle and Salesforce, were they writing Perl scripts or what does that look like?
It's a great question. So it could be Perl scripts, it could be JavaScript, it could be just about anything. And it's an interesting point because what we're finding is we have project teams that will bring us in and want to talk to us. And they're launching some large new initiative. It could be around implementing Salesforce.com or any other large application. But what happens oftentimes is these project teams fall under a great deal of time pressure. And so what happens is they end up saying, well, you know what, for phase one, we're just going to hand code this. We're just going to write some scripts to do it, and we'll revisit this when we get to phase two. The challenge is that those custom codes never go away. And so while they're trying to do what they think is the most prudent thing to get the project delivered, while it's good for the project delivery time frame, it's probably not in the best interest of the corporation long term. So what we find is it's really important to think about that this is, in probably the first project might not be quicker to use SnapLogic than to hand code it, but guess what? You're doing these integrations on a commercially supported platform. Our cost point is typically about, less expensive than what you would pay an FTE to write these scripts. And yet you don't get saddled with this long tail of integration maintenance that we talked about at this large retailer.
So I'm curious about the SnapStore, the ecosystem you've built here. How many developers do you have on that?
Gosh, that's a great question. I'm not sure I have a good answer for it today. It's a large community, and so what's interesting is that when we first launched it, we really thought it would just be the ISVs that tended to build those, and we certainly see quite a bit of that. The number one objection that these cloud providers get is, how do I integrate this? And so they love to be able to say, hey, you know what? You can go right to SnapLogic. We've got a Snap in their SnapStore, and you can integrate it to your heart's content. But what we're also finding is there are a lot of boutique integration firms, and so it could be a firm like TopCurve who's just fantastic at doing marketing automation. So that, they've spent years in this problem area. They understand kind of the data flow requirements to go from a Salesforce.com to your marketing automation system to your content management system to launch its campaigns. And so they've actually built out integrations specifically around that type of area. So not only the integrations, but also the process flows. And I think that's actually one of the greatest values to our customers is that they also not only get access to these snaps, but they can get access to some of these boutique integrators that really are sharpshooters and understand these different problem areas.
And then I always like to ask this of new companies. Do your prospects know that they have the problem in the first place, or are they self-identified?
They do. They really do. It's interesting. We find 2 points where we come in contact with prospects. As I mentioned earlier, at the project level, and oftentimes they're running really fast trying to get these projects implemented. And again, some of the large companies like Salesforce have created some direct point-to-point integrations with some of the common other applications. But the challenge with that is you're not really getting the opportunity to kind of virtualize your data beyond those apps. Mm-hmm. But what we also find is a lot of interest on the part of CIOs as well as CTOs and enterprise architects, because they're seeing this problem in spades. They're seeing the fact that the line of business has a lot of autonomy and the ability to make these decisions. It's not being run in their data center, so if the line of business owns the budget and you want to select an SFA system, they have the ability to do that. But at the end of the day, from a corporate standpoint, they can't afford to go back to the 90s where all of this data is locked up in these silos, because it's only when you aggregate that data from these disparate silos that you get competitive information. And that's what allows large and small companies to have a competitive advantage over their competitive landscape.
So kind of a wrap-up question here, Scott. What kind of reaction are you getting from these customers that have, kicked the tires on this and have been able to integrate using SnapLogic? What are they saying?
So, we're getting really great response. It's interesting. I mean, the problems that we heard, or the challenges that we heard a couple of years ago around security and scalability, really we're not running into as much today. I think what they're realizing is that all new innovations today are really going to be delivered through some type of cloud service. And even banks and financial services companies, surprisingly, are very much embracing the cloud. They realize they really don't have a choice. I don't know of any of the venture community that's funding the next big monolithic, perpetually licensed application.
Right.
I just don't see it out there at all today. So I've met with some of the largest financial services companies with the leadership teams, and I kind of start to saying, so what's your position on the cloud? Because if we can't get past that, this will be a short discussion. And they kind of chuckle and they say, no, we get it, and we understand there's ways to make sure that everything is done securely. Now, the fact that we can actually execute locally, they love that. It just allows them to kind of bypass that whole challenge about privacy and just where that data is residing and what have you. So a lot of attention, and I think what people are really realizing is that yes, ETL is not going to go away. I need that. Yes, I need my enterprise service bus. But gosh, the truly applicable use case for those is getting smaller and smaller. And there's this big gap in the middle where we don't have a commercial offering. And so we need something that fits in the middle that allows people to integrate quickly, efficiently, push it to a line of business to the extent you can, but just avoid all of that hand custom scripting and coding that just becomes a big bottleneck and legacy and really strips away the ability for people to be agile.
Well, great. Well, Scott Edgington, I want to thank you for coming on the show today.
You bet. Well, thank you very much, Rich.
It's my pleasure. Okay, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on the world of cloud computing. So let me hit the stop button here.